Escape from Tarkov has always been a game of polarized accomplishments. In this corner, a one-of-a-kind FPS that defined the extraction shooter genre with punitive gameplay, immersive audio, and an in-depth, realistic weapon customization system that make PvP and PvE encounters terrifying. In the other corner, a washed-up has-been with unoptimized gameplay, embarrassingly stupid AI, an audio system that is temperamental at its best, and a cheater-infested, RNG-based, grindy snooze fest that begets the question: why don't Tarkov players just play a game that requires less time investment, like old school RuneScape or something? Do I sound like I don't enjoy this game to you? It's something to behold, really, this polarized video game. Would you believe that this is what someone sounds like when they are in absolute love with Escape from Tarkov? I'll have you know that for every wipe of EFT I play with no flea market. I don't do anything crazy, like deny myself access to trader gear or anything, but I do enjoy a bit of that Iron Man gameplay. I feel it's how EFT was developed to be played, and something about the flea market kills that immersion for me. So you can imagine that when BSG surprise announced the hardcore wipe, I was defending the decision to the hilt. No flea market? Obviously excellent. Nerfed safety containers? Perfect. I play on a standard account and I hate the insane advantage $250 can get you. Expensive traders? Okay. Increased hideout item requirements? Nah, I don't know. 100% boss spawns. That sounds like it's going to make doing really anything else underwhelming. Transit only to certain maps. Double the queue time? Yeah, no thanks, BSG. Jesus. I'm doing a rather lengthy video on another game right now, and so I'd like to make this one quick. BSG has had a history of taking risks with their development. BSG also has had a history of using game design that is so obscure, so punitive, and so out of the box that it isn't always easy to tell whether or not they are experimenting with something genius or taking the piss out of their player base. Frankly, I don't think they often know where the two lines end or begin. Disabling the flea market is the biggest no-brainer for BSG, and that is no secret. It's been the case for any game that has a large, cross-server, universal trade system that playing without it not only provides players with a greater sense of accomplishment, but also gives the player base a more intimate relationship with the game's more niche pieces of content. Grand Exchange? Iron Man mode. Auction House? Iron Man mode. Flea Market? Iron Man mode. The reason this happens so often is not just because people like the sense of accomplishment associated with being self-sufficient, but also because the more you play a game without relying on other players to farm mats and the like for you, the more you're forced to engage with the whole of the game to accomplish your goals. The more players engaging with the whole of the game, the more the developers are forced to look at the health of every single aspect of progression in their title. Thus, playing solo is very often not only more rewarding, but also creates a cycle in which the game itself becomes better due to a significant portion of its player base keeping a close eye on its more niche systems. A conversation taking place in EFT right now is the nature of the key system for tasks. Certain tasks require keys to access certain rooms, so if you don't have those keys, you don't progress. Most players get around this by just buying them off of the flea or bartering for them. But bartering for task keys can be really RNG dependent. If you don't get the keys you need, well, you're not progressing. And because BSG has relied on the flea market trades to make up for the fact that it's often very tedious to get those keys, they've also been lax in making the keys more reliable. Right now, with more people getting into the Iron Man playstyle thanks to guys like Pest, the conversation around how to make those keys more accessible has been increasing in fervor, and that is just one example of how this stuff works. So no flea market. It gets you out of the UI, it gets you into more games, it makes you more self-reliant, and it makes you take the time to loot the actual areas you might need barter items and hideout upgrades from. It's the best. Just delete the flea market at 1.0, please. You guys are already so close to perfection if you just make the keys more reliable. I've always found that people don't complain enough about the secured containers you can get with premium versions of the game. The alpha container is single-handedly one of the best items, not only in your starting gear, but also just in the whole of Escape from Tarkov, eclipsed only by the upgraded containers that come after. Being able to start with a 3x3 grid versus a 2x2 is absolutely fucking massive for long-term progression. I don't like that players can purchase the ability to stick a 15-use CMS kit into their container and then still have the room for a docs case, key tool, injector case, and 2 stacks of ammunition for their troubles. It feels like such a massive advantage over other players that I don't see how some people describe it as a quality of life upgrade and not the outright pay to win that it is. It is for these reasons that I feel great that they are nerfing containers to not include medical items and ammunition. Although with hideout upgrades not requiring found in raid, the overwhelming advantage remains in a whole other area. My experience playing the hardcore wipe on a standard account has been a story of stash space and the production of cash. For the first 2 days of the wipe, my sole purpose in life was to get to 1.8 million rubles to buy my first Lucky Scav junk box. This is because I was hoarding items for my hideout upgrades, so that I could actually progress in the game. Because I was hoarding all of these items in doubly fashion, my stash quickly ran out of space, and I was forced to begin taking extra time choosing between holding upgrade materials or weapons and gear. During a normal wipe, I would have been able to shirk this problem rather quickly since I can upgrade my stash hideout much faster, diminishing the amount of space taken up by items in my stash. But this problem isn't just down to hideout requirements. Because everything costs a massive percentage more to buy and sells for far less, acquiring cash is extremely slow. This means that getting to the junk box, which usually only costs 1.1 million rubles, is far more of a journey than it normally would be. And it is a journey not spent raiding, but a journey spent in your stash. Now, this is a hardcore wipe, so I understand the idea behind all of these economic and grindy changes. But the end result hasn't been to make players play any differently. Yes, you probably play ultra careful for the first few raids of the wipe, and yes, you probably scav a little more than you otherwise would have for the sake of free cash, but eventually everyone figures out that the best way to progress in Tarkov is to, 85% of the time, hold the W key on their PMC and get stuck in. All of that to say my gameplay hasn't been changed in the same way someone who bought extra stash space has. People with premium accounts will still need to play up to a scav box in-game the same way I do, but they will not need to spend even half the time that I did in the UI playing Tetris. The game up to this point normally has been balanced around people starting with a standard account. In a normal wipe, playing Tetris is barely a minor headache until your first scav box, and then quickly becomes a rare problem. For the hardcore wipe, it seems like BSG planned the whole thing around everyone taking part having a premium account or extra stash space as purchased through their website. There was absolutely zero thought given to how upping the price of junk boxes along with destroying sell prices of all items would affect players who didn't pay extra for the luxury of stash space. If I had a premium account, I would have been able to play at least twice the amount of raids that I was actually able to in the last week. This is because for every 10 minutes you spend in a raid, there is another 10 minutes you need to spend in your stash, juggling your items around, organizing the space to fit your new items, selling off things you need but simply can't hang on to since you really don't have the room to take in all of your new items, and then growing so frustrated with the process that you give in and sell a bunch of stuff just so that you can get into your next raid. This problem was so bad that after not getting my first death 5 raids into the wipe, I became a little annoyed that I didn't have an excuse to pull some of my extra gear out of my stash to make space. I have never once had the experience in Escape from Tarkov of being annoyed that I hadn't died until this wipe. Part of me is cynical, if you can believe that. Surprising, I know. I do wonder if BSG didn't playtest the experience at all. Would they have noticed that standard accounts were going to be locked out of playing as much as the rest of the player base for the first 10 or 20 hours of their playtime? I mean, surely they would have known the junk box was a key item in giving standard players breathing room, and the price changes along with the hideout requirement increases would make having one even more important, while also being more difficult than ever to acquire. It begs the question, did they know what experience awaited their less financially generous customers and ignore the problem, or was this the intended experience? You can now buy stash space on BSG's website instead of needing to upgrade your account altogether, right? I wonder if part of the idea behind this wipe was to introduce mechanics that were so punitive as to drive its less patient consumers to its website to alleviate some of the more cumbersome design choices. Remember when Nikita tweeted that ref would be nerfed to make the wipe more hardcore? I've never played Tarkov Arena even once, and after all the development time that went into it, BSG is keen on improving their return for the game. That's why the two are linked, see? Playing an arena gets you XP and cash to send to your PMC in Tarkov. This way, you don't feel like you're wasting your time when you play it. Well, Nikita's tweet implied that this would not be a feature in the hardcore wipe, where access to reliable sources of cash is not quite as easy to find. But alas, people were transferring up to 1.5 million rubles to their PMC at the start of the wipe. This was brought down to a cap of 750k before being disabled outright, as far as I'm aware. Strange, isn't it? Nikita's tweet about ref being changed to better accommodate this wipe implied they understood that Arena would destroy its balance, and yet they didn't think to stop players from using Arena to farm cash. Anyone can make that mistake, right? Having a PMC cooldown timer because you don't have the stash space required not to die? Funny. Just buy some stash space. Anyone could make that mistake. Nikita, just because you've made a brilliant game does not mean you can't be a scumbag bastard of a man. Knock this shit off, you greedy fuck. Nobody is unaware of what you're trying to pull here. And with that off my chest, we can talk about the boss spawn rates, trader locks, and transits. Keep in mind, all 3 of these facets of the wipe have been changed and will continue to be changed throughout its duration. So a grain of salt, would you please? Boss spawn rates started from day 1 at 100%. With the only 3 maps available being Ground Zero, Customs, and Factory, this meant that Reshala, Tagilla, along with their equipment, ammunition, extraneous drops, and guards, all of who have decent equipment themselves, were on the map 100% of the time. You've heard the phrase less is more, yes? It applies. Coming across Tagilla in a normal wipe is heart-pounding. You hear him laugh as he takes out his sledgehammer, and you instinctively begin to haul ass. Reshala is a much finer wine. Normally, coming across him is like coming across an old friend who, when he feels generous, donates a nice item to you. His guards mean business, though. On hardcore, these two experiences become underwhelming. So much so that it's clearly not the right move to make both of their spawn rates 100%, or any of the boss's spawn rates 100%. On the wipe's release, spawning into factory or customs and just farming the bosses was about the only thing worth doing. Really, the only thing. You can't make money very easily doing anything else, and so naturally you opt to farm cash and good gear that most players can't possibly best over and over again. Boss encounters in EFT are supposed to be memorable and terrifying for the vast majority of players. Farming bosses in the hardcore wipe feels about as enthralling as farming scavs does on a normal wipe. This is doubly true because of the trader locks. Now, at the wipe start, we all expected traders to be nerfed, but we didn't expect them to have their tasks locked off. That is, we didn't expect not to be able to play the game. On the first day of the wipe, traders didn't have any tasks whatsoever. With no tasks in 3 maps, what does one do but look at their limited stash space and say, all right, time to make money by farming bosses? Answer: nothing at all. Without tasks to focus on, the game became a narrow sandbox. It was interesting to see what players tried to set as their own goals. Some were purely focused on hideout upgrades, for example. Some were hyper-farming task keys, while others just wanted to get good gear and make interesting weapons cobbled together from loose loot. Myself, I have a standard account, so my goal was set before I entered the game. I was going to have to farm for a scav box. We've already gone over that. There are pros to experimenting with this kind of thing, and seeing how players behave when the game doesn't give them direction is absolutely one of them, but I don't feel the experiment was worth the cost of eliminating progression from our actions. Although dailies and weeklies were available, so it wasn't really that bad, I suppose. I think my experience was just a little soured from the taste of eternal Tetris. Transits. This is a big one. And BSG have already, as of July 12th, 3 p.m. PST, completely reverted these changes. At the start of the wipe, I mentioned there were only 3 maps available. This is true, but for one exception. You could transit between areas to access any map, including those unavailable from the selection screen. Now, I have considered what it might be like to play on a challenge account. Here are the rules. You have a hideout on any map. Whatever map you choose, your hideout will be on. And you can only extract on that map for the rest of the playthrough. And you can only start a raid from that map. Naturally, this means that moving between areas requires you to transit to a secondary or tertiary location, then transit back before extracting to get back to your hideout on its original map. This is supposed to simulate the experience of moving around the map and then coming back to your starting location where your hideout is. Now, I only mention this to show that I actually like the transit idea. BSG can't make this game open world in the way they want to, and so transits are a nice compromise. I am not coming at this from the angle of disliking the concept. The problem arises, though, not in the game itself, but in its engine and the nature of queue times. To transit, players have to wait between 2 to 8 minutes in queue before getting onto the first available map. Then, from there, they have to make their way to the transit extract before waiting another 2 to 8 minutes in queue to get to another map. Some lucky players have been crashing, and the age-old bug of transit players spawning right next to one another has been seen once again. So, in the best scenarios, you're getting to double your queue time so that you can finally play the game. Neat! In the worst scenarios, this game, which is definitely 1.0 already, is either crashing mid-transit or pitting you against 5 players in a free-for-all for the right to play on the map. Again, the idea has its place in the game. If you don't like your spawn, you can use a transit early in the raid to play on a different map with a better one. If you have a valuable item and you need to get it to your stash, you can spend rubles to send it there while transitioning out. And if you want to play the game in the way I mentioned, as though it was an open-world stalker-esque PvP game, then transits open that opportunity up to you. But they're just not working right now. Even when BSG fixes the spawns and crashing, there will still be more to do. People have been saying this for years now, but queues have to be shorter. I personally like Pestely's idea of taking out the timer option in map selection so that nighttime and daytime players are merged together. But at the end of the day, I think they just gotta lower the max queue timer to 2 minutes and then come up with alterations starting from that point. I think what they could do is lower it to 2 minutes, and if a raid is, say, a quarter full at that point, start the raid, then add another 2 to 3 minutes to continue looking for other players, to throw in quickly at spawns that nobody else is near, if possible. This would mean that some players start late, but they would only have to wait in queue for a few seconds until getting picked up, which has to be worth it. I'd take that, are you kidding me? I know the game connects players at the start of the raid, so this might not be possible, but BSG needs to think of something because the queue timers are arguably the worst part about this game next to cheaters. And frankly, I think I hate the queue timers more because I, myself, rarely run into cheaters, but I am always staring at a fucking loading screen in Escape from Tarkov. The hardcore wipe has been an amalgamation of variables that bend in their respectability. I think BSG is genuinely testing some things out before 1.0, and I know Nikita wants to have his last hurrah before 1.0 releases, and inevitably, the idea of an open-world extract shooter that he's wanted all along is officially put to bed. The deletion of the flea market, the punitive traders, not having any insurance, we didn't cover that, but I like that. Even with the transit-only idea, there is potential here. But I'm also not a complete moron. I can see BSG trying to sell us on stash space. I can see them trying to get me to upgrade my account because I'm a loser who's only paid for this beta test once, and I can see them showing their ass as the sheer jank of the system working underneath EFT falls apart when people actually begin using the transits for the first time in their life. You cannot get away with calling this an experiment as a way to cover yourself up. It has its strengths, and I'm sure we will see aspects of it employed into 1.0. I'm personally praying for no flea, but it's also been an amateur's performance on the part of BSG. Crashes, bugs, the transit idea is just not working as it is. Tetris simulation, loading screen simulator. Boss encounters aren't interesting anymore, and I'm praying that doesn't stick with me during 1.0's release. BSG allowed only a handful of days to pass before they opened up Woods, and 12 hours following that decision, they decided to hell with it and opened up all the maps. This tells me that they didn't enjoy the experience being offered themselves. The fact that only a handful of days passed before BSG lowered the boss spawn rate to 70% tells me that they, at least in part, agree that the rarity of boss fights is what makes them exceptionally thrilling. Some will call this intellectual flexibility and an experimenter's agility. And while that's true, I think we need to remember that there are aspects of punishment to this wipe which are far more self-serving and intentionally aimed at torturing standard accounts. Not unto me will this game be sold twice, most certainly not before it's ever been released. Anyway, now with all of that said, I have to take some time to talk about the fun that I've been having with this wipe. Remember, this is all coming from someone who's in love with EFT. The fact that I know everyone else is playing flealess with cheaper equipment and, at the time of writing the script, level 1 traders makes me feel so much more confident taking fights on and pressing an advantage since I know that the vast majority of other players are playing with the same trash that I am. The 7.62 by 39mm FMJ might be bad, but I'm shooting it like it's M995. Give me a high five, my brother. I've always said that 545 by 39mm being considered poor ammunition is indicative of the FPS player's brain being hardwired, not for the finer aspects of gameplay, but for the moment the trigger is pulled. M855A1 is going to be a lot better a lot of the time with a properly built M4, but pick up a 74U for around 40k or whatever, don't mod it, and then run into a raid and stare at the ground. On pretty much every map, stare at the ground, you will find 545 BP, BS, and BT ammunition. Hell, I'm one-tapping losers with my favorite Powiesienoj Próbowej Mości, often considered not very good, but in my hands, I'd compare this concept with early game pressure in card games like Hearthstone. A 10 mana card is going to give you more value per card used than the 1 mana card, but those cheap cards are what get you into the mid and late game in the first place. That is what the 545mm is. A great early game card, just raw dog in factory with a stock 74U and the Russian military's last remaining cache of BP ammunition, courtesy of 100% Igia spawns. Thank you, sir. Building up the hideout never felt more annoying, but after getting that scav case, I'm actually quite enjoying it. In fact, I'd say having no flea market is made only better by having no found and raid requirement for hideout upgrades. Being able to barter or die with secure container hideout items feels at ease in contrast to the whole rest of the game, because no matter how much you get one tap, you still have some progression in that regard as long as you prioritize your hideout items. Task accomplishments, now that they are out, are something akin to love. It is a night and day difference how much the task system is married to the combat and loot mechanics of Tarkov. If one goes, they all go, and we desperately need them to hold hands. But now that they're back, I'm happy to say that I'm having more fun this wipe than I have in recent memory, going back at least a year in Escape from Tarkov. As a matter of fact, I think this will be the wipe where, for the first time ever, I pushed a Kappa. A Kappa for the first time and on a hardcore wipe. Is that something to brag about? Whatever. I think it's cool. And by the way, I will be streaming this wipe Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. through 12 p.m. PST on my other channel, my gaming channel. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested. If you're up, come and say hi. Perhaps we'll get Kappa together, eh? BSG. Nikita, this has been a critique and a love letter. I hope you take the lessons from this wipe that you were looking for and deliver the 1.0 experience we all know this game has the ability to uphold. Escape from Tarkov is one of a kind. It's its own caliber, if you will. You've made it a title that is currently known as a piece of genius, and now it's up to you as to whether or not that reception lives on through the ages, or crumbles, with time, as your competitors reiterate on the formula that you've created. I want the former, and I believe in you. Good luck, have fun.